Have you ever noticed how doing nothing sometimes seems like the safest choice? As if remaining still would protect you from mistakes, from judgments, from failure. There's something seductive about passivity. It offers immediate comfort, a sense of security, as if the world couldn't hurt you while you remain inert. But it's precisely in this apparent refuge that the silent danger lies. Passivity, when it becomes a habit, isn't neutral. It's not the absence of action. It's action, the action of allowing your own life to slowly slip through your fingers. Kierkegaard reminds us that there is a type of inertia that is not just physical but existential. He calls it silent despair, a life lived without taking responsibility for making decisions for oneself, without embracing the anguish that comes from freedom. It's paradoxical. We want security, but in seeking it by avoiding choices and risks, we become hostages to our surroundings. Passivity promises protection but delivers stagnation. It creates the illusion of control while secretly eroding our opportunities and vitality. In the modern world, passivity manifests itself in subtle ways. You watch someone on social media, endlessly scrolling, absorbing news, opinions, and other people's lives without ever truly taking action. You feel afraid to make important decisions, choosing a career path, confronting a failing relationship, starting a project that requires courage. All of this is, in essence, the same force, passivity. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't slam the door shut, it leaves it open, and day after day life slips away. The paradox is cruel. Passivity seems like a shelter from suffering, but it is itself a source of suffering. You believe you are protecting yourself from the risk of failure, but what really happens is that you expose yourself to a much greater risk. The loss of your own time, your own agency, your own identity. While you wait, you watch others move forward, make decisions, build experiences, while you remain on the sidelines, repeating to yourself that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow always arrives and you remain exactly where you were. There's a silent pain in passivity, often disguised as conformity or patience. It's the feeling of always being one step behind yourself, of observing yourself from the outside, watching opportunities pass you by and wondering why you couldn't act. It's a form of invisible suffering because there's no apparent drama, no explosive crises. There's only the slow, inexorable weight of a life that could have been lived with more intensity, with more courage, with more presence. And what keeps us trapped in this passivity? Part of it is fear, fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of discovering we're not as capable as we imagine. Another part is comfort. It's easier to stick with a predictable routine, even if it's unsatisfactory, than to face the discomfort of the unknown. But the paradox is that the discomfort of risk, choice, and conscious action is actually what keeps us alive. Discomfort awakens us, makes us feel, connects us with the reality of being human. Passivity, on the other hand, numbs us. We can observe this in everyday life. Think about the career you hesitated to pursue, the relationship you avoided confronting, the friendship you let grow cold. These are all manifestations of the same pattern. The silent fear of action, the illusion that inertia is safe. Life, however, doesn't wait. Time marches on, relentless, and every moment you spend paralyzed is a moment you will never return. Kierkegaard reminds us that existence is made of choices, and not choosing is also a choice to remain hostage to one's own hesitation. Passivity is, in essence, a form of self-deception. It makes us believe we're safe while robbing us of what we desire most: meaning, growth, connection. It's a silent, invisible enemy that cloaks itself in comfort and protection. And the most dangerous thing is that we don't always notice its presence. It infiltrates small, everyday decisions. I'm not going to take a stand today, I'll put it off until later, it's not the right time. Each of these moments seems trivial, but accumulated, they shape a lifetime of silent regrets. Yet, recognizing the paradox is the first step toward transforming it. There is a profound awareness that arises when we realize that passivity is not neutral, that remaining still is, in fact, a choice, and that, by choosing not to act, we relinquish our own agency, the possibility of experiencing life in all its complexity. It is in this awakening that freedom resides, in the realization that every conscious gesture, every decision, no matter how small, is an antidote to the silent erosion of passivity. So, before seeking refuge in inertia, ask yourself, what are you really avoiding? What could you achieve if you just dared to take the first step? Kierkegaard challenges us to embrace the anguish of freedom, to feel the discomfort of choice and still move. For it is in conscious movement, in the deliberate act of acting despite fear, that we find what it means to be alive. Passivity offers a promise of security that never comes to fruition. It deceives, seduces, and imprisons. But awareness of this trap allows us to break the cycle. Life demands courage. Life demands action. And true protection lies not in the absence of risk, but in the presence of intention. If in the previous chapter we saw the paradox of passivity, now we need to look within ourselves. Why, even knowing the silent cost of inertia, do we continue to allow it to guide our lives? The answer, as always, lies in the mind, in the complexity of our psychological functioning, in the shadows we carry, and in the fears we rarely dare to name. Carl Jung offers us a powerful lens through which to understand this behavior. He tells us about shadow, the part of ourselves that we reject, deny, or don't know. Passivity often stems from the shadow, from the fear of failure, from the fear of facing our own limits, from the resistance to confronting who we truly are. What we avoid is precisely what most needs to be explored. By ignoring our shadow, we create habits that protect us from immediate discomfort but trap us in repetitive patterns. Fear of failure is just one facet of this phenomenon. There's also fear of success, the often unconscious idea that achieving something great exposes us, tests us, forces us to deal with expectations we don't know if we can meet. So we remain immobile, hoping that time will somehow spare us this tension. But time spares no one. It only advances, and with it, the feeling of regret grows, silent, almost invisible. Another psychological factor that fuels passivity is perfectionism. It creates the illusion that we're never ready, that every step needs to be calculated, every decision needs to be perfect. But perfection is unattainable, and waiting for the ideal moment becomes a prison. Life doesn't wait for perfection. It demands action even when we're unsure, even when we feel like we don't yet have all the answers. There is also the impostor syndrome, a phenomenon that haunts many of us. The feeling that we are not capable enough, that we don't deserve what we desire, leads us to hesitate, to procrastinate, to become spectators of our own lives. Passivity becomes, in this context, a form of self-preservation. If I don't try, I can't fail. But by choosing this illusory security, we miss out on opportunities, experiences, and growth. The paradox is cruel. Passivity arises from the attempt to avoid pain, but it creates pain in itself. Jung teaches us that the shadow, when ignored, finds subtle ways to manifest itself. Procrastination, indecision, and constant hesitation are not character flaws. They are manifestations of the side of us that has not yet been integrated, of what we are running away from within ourselves. By ignoring what we feel, by avoiding confronting our fears, we create a life governed by invisible forces. This dynamic isn't just individual, it's amplified by the modern world. We live surrounded by stimuli that distract us from our own shadows. Social media, constant entertainment, external demands. Every notification, every flash of information, offers us a temporary escape, an excuse to postpone difficult decisions. And as we distract ourselves, our passivity solidifies, becoming a habit, becoming our identity. But awareness is key. Realizing that we are being guided by fears, unrealistic expectations, or the weight of the shadow is the first step to breaking the cycle. Jung challenges us to look within, to recognize our repressed parts, to confront what paralyzes us. And this confrontation is neither simple nor comfortable. It requires courage. It requires presence. It requires, above all, brutal honesty with oneself. When we can look at the shadow and recognize its role, passivity loses its power. It doesn't disappear completely because inertia is always lurking, but its influence diminishes. Every conscious decision, every step taken despite fear, weakens the habit of paralysis. It's a continuous, silent process, often invisible to others, but profoundly transformative for those who experience it. We can also realize that passivity is, paradoxically, a form of silent communication. It expresses our resistance, our insecurities, and our limitations. By acknowledging it, not with blame, but with understanding, we open space for conscious action. Life doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. It doesn't demand the absence of fear, it demands the courage to act despite it. Ultimately, understanding the psychology behind passivity allows us to see that we are not mere spectators of our lives. We are beings capable of choice, action, and transformation. Jung reminds us that the shadow is not an enemy, it is a guide. It shows us where we are stuck, where we need to grow, where our silent decisions are shaping our destiny. True change begins when we stop justifying inaction and begin acting with intention. Every small step, every decision made, every confrontation with our own fear is an act of liberation. And as we learn to integrate our shadow, passivity ceases to be an invisible force dominating us and becomes a reminder, a silent reminder that life demands movement, courage, and presence. If passivity is silent and invisible in our personal lives, in the modern world it manifests itself even more broadly, almost imperceptibly, yet profoundly transformative. We live in an age of speed, constant information, and endless distractions. And paradoxically, the more connected we are, the more passivity finds room to flourish. It disguises itself as digital comfort, social conformity, and the acceptance of what is good enough. Zygmunt Bauman, in his analysis of liquid modernity, offers us a powerful perspective. He describes a world in which everything is temporary, fluid, and unstable: relationships, jobs, identity. In this context, passivity ceases to be merely an individual trait and becomes a social norm. People avoid commitment and profound decisions because the world around them offers no guarantees. The fluidity of modernity fuels inertia. If nothing is fixed, if everything is fleeting, why act decisively? Why take risks if tomorrow can undo any effort? Social media is perhaps the clearest example of this phenomenon. It offers us endless opportunities to observe the lives of others without ever truly engaging. We scroll through endless feeds, consuming other people's stories, opinions, and achievements, while simultaneously postponing action in our own lives. Every like, every comment, every digital distraction is a small escape from the responsibility to create, decide, and dare. Passivity becomes a subtle trap. We feel the illusion of participation, but we are merely spectators of what could be our own existence. This influence is not just technological but cultural. Modern society often values stability, conformity, and passive consumption. We are conditioned to accept external standards, secure jobs, adequate relationships, predefined lifestyles, and while we follow these implicit rules, our own choices take a back seat. Passivity is not just personal, it is social. It is reinforced by an environment that rewards inertia and sanctions risk. And the consequences are profound. When passivity spreads throughout the modern world, it creates alienation. Connected people become increasingly emotionally isolated. They watch but don't live. They accumulate information but not meaningful experiences. Time, our most precious resource, is lost to distractions, while real opportunities for personal growth and human connection quietly disappear. We can also see this trend in careers, relationships, and consumer culture. How many of us stay in jobs that don't stimulate us, in relationships that don't nurture us, just because it's safer? How many settle for superficial experiences, instant entertainment, and external validation, without taking the risk of seeking what truly matters? The modern world offers everything except meaning, and passivity leaves us vulnerable to that absence. The paradox is again cruel. Technology, social fluidity, and the constant search for comfort promise freedom, but often trap us in habits of inaction. We become connected yet isolated, informed yet indecisive, busy yet stagnant. Every small, postponed choice accumulates, shaping lives that at first glance seem complete, but which, in the depths of human experience, are empty of purpose. Still, there is hope. Recognizing the impact of passivity in the modern world is the first step toward reclaiming leadership in one's own life. By realizing how the external environment influences our choices, or lack thereof, we can begin to act more consciously. Small gestures become meaningful, tuning out distractions, prioritizing real experiences, making courageous decisions even if imperfect. Passivity ceases to be inevitable when we become aware of its pitfalls. Every deliberate action, every step outside the comfortable flow of digital and social inertia, is an affirmation of agency. It's a silent reminder that, despite the modern world, we can still decide how we want to live, how we want to feel, how we want to impact our own lives. The modern world is not only a space of risk, but also of opportunity. If we learn to navigate its pitfalls, distractions, conformity, fluidity, we can transform passivity into conscious action. We can transform a life that seemed shaped by habit and fear into a life chosen, felt, and lived. And yet, the paradox remains: action requires courage, and courage requires discomfort. Modern life offers us every tool to move forward, but also every excuse to remain paralyzed. Recognizing this paradox is perhaps the first act of freedom. Realizing that even in a world that seduces us with distractions, we still have the responsibility and the power to choose. Theory helps us understand, but it is in everyday life that passivity reveals its cruelest face. It manifests itself not as major catastrophes, but in small moments that, accumulated, shape the destiny of an entire life. Imagine someone who has always wanted to write, but postpones the first paragraph until it's ready. Or someone who wants to change careers, but is trapped in the comfort of a guaranteed salary. Or even the friend who knows a relationship isn't working out, but prefers indifference to the difficult conversation. Every hesitation, every wait, is a small renunciation, silent but powerful. Passivity is like a river that appears calm on the surface, but over time erodes its banks, diverts its course, and invisibly shapes the terrain. Every decision we fail to make, every step we fail to take, leaves a trail. Lost opportunities, dreams that wither, connections that weaken. Life is not a static space. It is constant movement, choice, and creation. To remain still is, therefore, to allow the world to shape your destiny without your participation. We can look at this through a simple analogy. Imagine a tree that is never pruned or cared for. At first glance, it appears robust and resilient. But without attention and intervention, its branches grow haphazardly, some parts withering, others becoming fragile. Passivity works the same way in our lives. Without conscious action, we allow habits, fears, and conformity to spread, shaping our path in almost imperceptible but irreversible ways. There's also the emotional dimension of passivity, silent and painful. How many of us have felt the weight of regret, that silent feeling that arises when we realize we could have done things differently? It doesn't come with an explosion, but with a slow sadness that accompanies each postponed choice. Passivity creates a space where guilt never needs to be explicit, because the very act of not acting is enough to corrode us. Life stories demonstrate this in detail. The young person who never applied for that career-changing job opportunity, the person who waited for the right moment to travel, to express their feelings, to change, only to realize decades later that time had slipped away without return. The individual who avoids confronting toxic relationships, preferring the temporary comfort of inaction, only to find that the pain intensifies with age. Each example reveals the same pattern. Passivity seems protective, but in fact imprisons. But it's not just about regret. There's also the impact on self-perception. Those who live passively begin to see themselves as incapable, indecisive, someone who lacks control over their own narrative. Self-esteem is eroded not by obvious failure, but by the silent habit of inertia. It's a slow erosion that erodes confidence, ambition, and vitality. And yet, it is possible to transform this reality. Awareness is the first step. Observing where passivity dominates, recognizing its manifestations, understanding the fears and comforts that fuel it, all of this opens the door to small changes. Every act of decision, no matter how small, represents a break from the cycle of inaction. A phone call you've avoided making, a project you begin, a difficult conversation you face. Each gesture is an affirmation. I can still participate in my own life. The most fascinating thing is realizing that these small gestures have a ripple effect. One conscious decision inspires another. One courageous step makes the next easier. The simple act of recognizing passivity and taking action, even in small areas, is like turning on a light in a dark room. The light doesn't invade everything at once, but it shows the way, reveals obstacles, and awakens possibilities. Reflecting on concrete examples helps us see that passivity is not just a moral or character flaw. It is a human condition amplified by fear, comfort, and the pressures of the modern world. But at the same time, it is an opportunity for growth. Because if we can identify it, if we can feel its silent influence, we can also resist it. We can choose to act, even imperfectly, even fearfully. And each conscious action is a small victory against the invisible erosion of inertia. So, take a close look at your life. Where have you let passivity guide your choices? What dreams have been put on hold? What relationships have cooled? Recognizing these patterns isn't a reason for guilt, but a call to action. Change begins the moment we deliberately decide to be active participants in our own stories. And so, even if passivity has shaped part of your life thus far, there is still room for action, for decision, for courage. Every small gesture is a seed that can transform the hardened soil of inertia into fertile ground for real experiences, meaning, and growth. Life, after all, doesn't wait. But we can finally stop waiting and start truly living. If in the previous chapters we explored the paradox of passivity, the fears that fuel it and its silent impact on the modern world, Now it is time to look at the opposite path. Conscious activity. It's not about reckless action, impulsive decisions, or a relentless pursuit of productivity. It's about acting with intention, presence, and courage, choosing even in the face of fear to take responsibility for your own life. Viktor Frankl, in his work on meaning and purpose, reminds us that life demands decision. He teaches us that even in extreme conditions, the deepest freedom we possess is the choice of our attitude towards circumstances. Every conscious action is, in essence, an affirmation of agency, a declaration that we will not be mere spectators of our own existence. Passivity disappears not through the strength of will alone, but through the recognition that every step, however small, matters. The path of conscious activity begins with self-knowledge, observing our fears, recognizing our shadows, identifying the patterns that keep us inert. All of this is necessary to transform inaction into deliberate action. Jung reminds us that integrating the shadow is not just an intellectual exercise, but an emotional one. It's confronting what paralyzes us, accepting our limitations, and still moving forward. This practice manifests itself in concrete gestures. Choosing to act when we would normally postpone. Making small but meaningful decisions. Starting that seemingly impossible project. Expressing long repressed feelings, facing a difficult conversation, experiencing something challenging. Each conscious act strengthens the awareness that we are capable of actively participating in our own narrative. In the modern world, acting consciously also means resisting distractions and conformity. It means turning off notifications that trap us in the illusion of constant busyness, prioritizing experiences that connect us with the real and profound, and choosing environments that encourage growth rather than stagnation. Conscious activity is, therefore, a form of freedom. Freedom to decide, freedom to feel, freedom to create meaning. But acting consciously isn't an isolated act. It's a continuous, silent process, almost invisible to others, but profoundly transformative for those who experience it. Every decision made despite fear is a step toward a more fulfilling life. Every choice made with presence and attention is an antidote to the silent erosion of passivity. The courage required isn't heroic or dramatic, it's everyday. It's the courage to look within, recognize what paralyzes us, and still move. It's the courage to realize that time doesn't wait, that every moment of hesitation is a lost opportunity, and that life is fulfilled through the sum of small, conscious decisions. And there's something even more powerful on this path. Awareness transforms our relationship with fear. It ceases to be an absolute enemy and becomes a silent guide, indicating where we need to grow, where action is most urgent, where life calls us. Passivity is dissolved not by the absence of fear, but by the courage to act despite it. When we integrate this practice into our lives, we realize that every deliberate choice reverberates. It impacts not only our individual destiny, but also our relationship with others, the world, and time. Life ceases to be a flow that sweeps us along, and becomes something we touch, shape, and feel. Therefore, conscious activity is not a distant ideal. It begins now, in the simple gesture, in the small decision, in the choice that refuses to wait. Each step taken is a challenge to passivity, a return to presence and responsibility. It is the affirmation that we are, after all, the authors of our own story, even in a world that seduces us with distractions and conformity. And so we realize that true security lies not in inaction, but in intention. True protection lies not in the absence of risk, but in the presence of awareness. Each deliberate act is a small, silent victory, a stone thrown into the river of passivity that, until then, seemed uncontrollable. Life demands decision. Life demands courage. Life demands presence. And every conscious choice reminds us that we are still alive, we can still feel, we can still create meaning. Passivity is but a shadow that disappears before the light of intentional action. If we've come this far, we understand the paradox of passivity, the fears that fuel it, its silent presence in the modern world, and the transformative power of conscious action. Now, there's one question you may have already asked yourself. How much of your life are you letting slip away while you wait, hesitate, or fear to act? Passivity, as we've seen, isn't just an absence of action. It's a subtle force that shapes destinies, erodes opportunities, and steals vitality. It manifests itself in procrastination, indecision, hesitation, and even the illusion of comfort it gives us. But at the same time, awareness of this force offers us something precious, the opportunity to choose. Every moment you decide to act, however small, is a gesture of rebellion against inertia. Every deliberate choice is a silent declaration. I will not be a spectator of my own life. Viktor Frankl reminds us that even in the face of suffering or limitations, we are free to decide our attitude, our meaning, our response. This freedom is the only weapon against the silent emptiness of passivity. The paradox of modern life is that, while it offers us endless distractions, it also offers us infinite opportunities. But the choice to live fully, to create meaning, and to embrace courage is ours and ours alone. Every conscious gesture, every decision made, transforms the narrative of our existence, restoring protagonism, agency, and presence. And perhaps the most disturbing thing is realizing that time doesn't wait. Every moment of hesitation, every step you don't take, is an instant that will never return. Life at its core is movement. True security lies not in immobility, but in the awareness that by acting even in fear we are truly living. So ask yourself, are you allowing passivity to guide your life? Or are you willing to feel the discomfort, face the fear, and act with intention? The answer doesn't have to be dramatic or immediate, but it does have to be there. For silent inertia is, in itself, a decision, and every decision, conscious or not, shapes the course of your life. If something in this video made you pause, reflect, or feel, perhaps it's because part of you needed to hear it. Every small choice is a step away from inertia. Every conscious gesture is a silent act of courage. Passivity may have shaped part of your story thus far, but it doesn't define what can still be experienced. Life demands courage. Life demands action. Life demands presence. And the final question, echoing in the silence of your thoughts, remains open. Will you continue to just watch, or will you finally decide to fully participate in your own existence? If this echo remains with you, remember, the first step doesn't have to be grand, but it needs to be yours. And from that moment on, every small conscious decision will be a silent victory against the passivity that, for so long, wanted to govern your life.